Hey guys, sorry, we are live. Welcome to the Vero Advisors live stream where we go live once a week to share all things digital transformation related in the public sector. We are happy for you joining us today. We have a special content day planned for you guys where we plan to tell scary stories. And if you notice, we are all dressed up today because Halloween is tomorrow. And I have a few of my very close friends who are here to share scary stories with you. If you are joining us today, make sure that you download our 2025 report. It is this QR code in my upper right hand corner. So make sure you scan that QR code and download our recent report on all things digital transformation. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it to the team and let them introduce themselves and tell us who you're dressed up like and tell us your favorite Halloween movie. So, AV, if you want to kick us off.
Hey, good morning. I'm AV. I'm the founder and CEO at Avero. I am dressed up as myself, and you might have seen me on Yellowstone playing Pip. So I am good at taking bad projects and failing implementations to the train station, if you know what I mean.
Oh, I love it. And your favorite Halloween movie?
I think Scary Movie, that whole
Yeah,
series. Yeah, I just like
it's a
the guy
classic.
with the weird hand making the salad. That was cool.
Thank you, AV. Dave D.
Hi, I'm Dave Dar, and I am the AA Director of Client Success at Avero. And I do have some scary stories, but I'm dressed up as one of our favorite things, which is Dilbert in the professional world, doing agile and things like that when not even knowing it. So happy to share some scary stories today. Go to the train station, but I definitely get to enjoying some spooky stories with clients that we'll be happy to share with you guys very shortly.
Yes. Dave B.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is David Buchanan. I'm a senior consultant here at Avera Advisors. AV kind of stole my line a little bit. This is my natural hair, so I didn't know we were dressing up for this stream. My fault. I should have got on the same page. No, so a little bit stuck in the 80s right here with the mullet. I couldn't exactly let it go. As far as favorite Halloween movies concerned, I would say Scary Story is definitely a great pick, but classic horror movie would definitely be like the first Halloween movie. That early series was definitely fantastic.
You took mine, Dave. Thank you. I appreciate it. Carrie.
Hey everybody, I'm Carrie Tapscott. I am dressed as a consultant today. Sorry I didn't have time to throw in the costume, but I'm a director of client success also here with Avero. And I would say probably my favorite scary movie, Halloween style movie would be, I'm a huge fan of dry British comedy. So Shaun of the Dead, if you've seen it, is an all-time classic of mine. It's funny, it's sweet, it's got zombies, it kind of checks all the boxes.
Yeah.
And if anyone didn't like Dilbert, I'm from Shaun of the Dead, apparently, too.
Well, thank you guys for introducing yourselves. Again, I'm Megan Seaton. I lead business development at Avera Advisors. My favorite Halloween movie of all time is the original Halloween. And honestly, I don't like scary movies at all, but I love that movie. And I'm a huge fan also of the Saw movies because they're super weird and creepy. I'm not dressed up as anyone, but I am sporting a Halloween Town University for all my Disney babies out there who grew up on Disney Channel originals. So huge fan of Halloween Town. So thank you guys for sharing. If you're joining us today, make sure you type in the comments what your favorite scary movie is. We'd love to hear from you. Please make this engaging. We want to hear your comments. We want to hear your questions because we are here to provide advice and be your trusted advisors. So, Dave B., I think you are going to kick us off with the first scary story. So I'm going to pass the mic to you to dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. So first scary story of the day is we had a client that was going through an implementation with a vendor. And during that implementation, most things were going somewhat smoothly. There was some, maybe a little minor here and there, stuff like that. The implementation company would be like, oh, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. Fast forward a couple months later, it's like, well, it was actually a big deal and we're going to end up needing a change order. Now, thankfully, us and our team, we were able to kind of avoid that, to kind of talk a little bit about the contract language because the explanation was that this is based off of an older structure. It needs a little bit more work. We're like, well, change order is going to have to come by something that was out of scope of work. So thankfully, that's not what occurred. We were able to save one of our clients, but that's just one of the very, very minor, but examples that can happen during implementations. Sometimes you just have somebody who's, oh, this isn't too big of a risk, and the next thing you know, that little risk starts building and building and building up to where now you're having to have that conversation of, do we have to pay extra money for this implementation of something that wasn't really even the client's fault to begin with?
Right. Right. And so what is your advice to those who could be experiencing, scope creep or, avoiding those risks in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely document everything. So every single
Mhm.
conversation that you have, even if they say, it's somebody that's going to be your best pal, this is just a small little minor risk. Make sure that you notate that down, that you had that discussion first off, and then always look at the contract that you signed, because there will be a lot of times where, oh, this is going to trigger a change order. But if you look back at the contract, it says as long as nothing's been completed out of scope, then a change order wouldn't be applicable there. So it's definitely to make sure you do your homework on that. And even if there is those small issues, don't just be okay with it. It's a small issue, but it's okay. Make sure that you understand the path forward and that there's a good solution for that. Don't let the implementation company push you off and say, this isn't a big deal, don't worry about it. Make sure that you always protect yourself.
Yeah. And ask
What
questions.
was scary about that? I know that the impact to the project, Dave, but talk about the scary aspects of it. These are people's lives
Yeah.
Right.
at stake, right? When you were
Absolutely.
talking to your clients, I'm sure they were scared.
No, absolutely. Definitely we're scared. So a couple implications that can have is not only the cost side of things, but also B, you're talking about possibly pushing a go live date because the work's not able to be completed. You're not having to have these conversations. So, and especially if you're having a pivotal transition of maybe your old system's going to go offline and it's no longer going to be working anymore, you can't exactly operate for a couple weeks. Just say, oh well, we don't have a system. We'll file it all on paper. That's a nightmare in and of itself. So that was definitely a big concern that we had. But we were, like I said, we were able, thankfully, to mitigate that. So there's more than just money that comes into play. So it's not, oh, we need an extra $10,000 here, this, that, or the other. There could also be timeline implications that can really, really change the impact of the project in the future.
Well, and money doesn't just fall off trees, obviously. Like
Mhm.
our clients, our CFOs, finance directors, they have to go to their councils
Mhm.
and ask for money, which, if handled well, is not scary, but most of the time that is not a good look for any CFO to say, we did not estimate this right, or we didn't pick the right vendors, and therefore we want to ask for more money without having a great explanation for why.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And Dave, you mentioned something about, the vendors sunsetting their products, right? And recently, for whatever reason, AV and I have talked to several prospects that are coming to us and they're saying, hey, my vendor is sunsetting and I've got to move to the cloud by the end of the year. And it's like, whoa, how scary is that for them?
Mhm.
Not only does it cost money, we've already talked about that, but they're like, how are we going to take our on-prem solution to the cloud by the end of the year? How are we going to do that? And so essentially they're backed into a corner, and I couldn't even imagine how that must feel. So does anyone want to give advice to those clients or give your 2 cents on how you feel about that scary story?
I'll take that on, because I was on that
Yeah.
recent call, right? It was, I think the scary part to me was that the client wasn't scared enough. They were
Yeah.
more annoyed about
Mhm.
being put in a corner by this vendor, which is an international vendor that has sort of cornered that market. So it's easy for that vendor to say, we no longer will support your product at the end of 2026. So you better sign here and better get on this cloud product, by the way, which we can't show you because it's in production and we're still making it, and you will be live in March, by the way. Sign here. The scary part was when we explained to the client that this is physically not possible because of how much data and how critical your operations are. It's a state Supreme Court, by the way. I can tell you that. A state Supreme Court is slow moving by nature. They have a lot of data, a lot of sensitive data. They have judges that are overseeing multiple cases. It's not as easy as just switching a 2-person accounting firm from QuickBooks to Xero or what have you. So that was the scary part, where we explained how this is supposed to work and that you're not really going to move to the cloud in 2 months. You would, but it's not going to work, right? So that's when the questions start coming, and that's when people start asking us about how this works and what should we be doing. And we were able to give them options they hadn't thought about on how to handle this particular, what I would call ransomware in some ways, right? You're holding the client hostage and saying, sign here. And by the way, we're going to charge you more for the cloud product. And by the way, you still have to pay for your licensing for the next 1 year for this on-premise product that we are sunsetting. That's when it got real scary.
It was the most interesting call I've ever been a part of. So I agree. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? Nope. Okay. Well, let's go on with the next scary story. Dave D, what you got for us?
Sure, happy to share a very recent story. Actually, I have we have a smaller client that's in California, and they started implementation with a common vendor, and very similar to David B. In this situation, they had asked specifically they need to have permitting and forms and special things for their city councils, special events. And reporting that were very crucial to them in this situation. And the vendor said, yeah, we'll get to it. Not a big deal. Send us all your data. Give us information. We'll definitely come up, and take care of it, right? And so they did that at the very beginning of the project. This is also a good explanation of why you need a good PMO and someone staying on things. And as David said, you need to protect your own baby and watch after things, because the client assumed that it was being worked on because the vendor said that it was being worked on. And then about 2 to 3 weeks before go live, when they asked, hey, how's everything going for the forms and everything? They said, we never got your data. So they went back to email, found that they did send it. But the client then said, actually, it's going to cost you $5,000 to get a quote for those reports and $250 an hour just to get the quote, not even to get the work done, right? Which put the client in a tough situation, right? It was almost a nickel and dime, and hey, if they really need this, let's put the screws to them, per se. So the client was in a difficult situation. We talked about CFO had to go back to the board and ask for funding, right? For many parties, right? Because delays, and so it ruined the taste of that vendor with them, in fact, and they're looking for us to help them with solutions around that vendor. But either way, the main lesson and takeaway here is that you need to always protect your own interests and keep following up. Do not assume that just because the vendor said, yeah, we've got the data, we're taking a look at it, means that's going to be done. So that client is still shaking in their boots from that experience. And, we're trying to come in and fix some of the problems that have happened from that. So, and we are, but it'd be great if, we could tell vendors and everyone to watch after this, ability to say that things are being done and then last minute just drop the ball. Just always expect the worst.
So
how did you sorry, Megan, how did you exercise that ghost? Like, what did we do to step in specifically?
Sure. So what we did as a Avero, we did a post go live workshop or worked on it. And so we said, there's other solutions aside from using this vendor. Would you like to exercise them? And the client was like, yes, please. Yes. We don't want to give this company any more money or a cent after what they've done to us. Right. So we stepped in as an advocate. And then actually, to be honest with you, one of the things is we pushed on the vendor hard enough. We were considered quote unquote hostile to the vendor, unfortunately, but sometimes you have to push as an advocate for your client, and we were able to get at least 1 to 2 reports out, right, based on basically the facts and the delays and so on and so forth. But that still didn't meet the client's needs, so we're doing like a post go live workshop to find all the common errors, so we can go back, push back, and do we solution them with the vendor or do we find outside solutions? And that's actually what we're working on right now.
So how can our clients protect themselves in the negotiation phase via contracting? A lot of these things can be laid out when you're negotiating that price, where you're negotiating with that selected vendor. So what is some advice that you guys would give in terms of contracting and putting some of this language in there so that the client is protected?
I think, and I'll speak up first. I think it is that's part of our duty as well as working with our clients, but having really strong, service level agreements in there, making sure that the vendor is going to deliver on what they promised on. There are a lot of times we get into contracts with these folks, and a vendor will make all these promises. Then when it comes time to go live or deliverables, they'll say, "Oh, that requires a scope change. That requires additional funds. That's a different module." I think really holding the vendor, their feet to their fire, and getting everything you want in writing up front in the contract and holding them to that and making sure they deliver on their promise.
Yeah, no, that's good advice, Carrie. I agree. Dave, do you have anything to add?
I just saw that my name was changed to Duke, so that was interesting. No, absolutely. So kind of talk a little bit about what Carrie was talking about. So whenever you're negotiating a contract, for one, make sure that you understand everything that is in that contract. Make sure that every single piece has come through, and make sure that you understand what can trigger a change order, because you don't want to have some contract language in there that you don't necessarily understand, that later on down the road, well, this is what this word actually means, so now please provide us more money, or there might be a delay in go live. So it's going to be making sure that you understand that contract fully and thoroughly, and so that way whenever that situation does come up, you can always fall back on that contract. You know that it will protect you.
Yeah. What about AV language about said vendor pulling the plug or sunsetting their system? Is there anything you can do in terms of that in your contract with the vendor?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how it's written, right? The vendors they can always say at the end of your term, if they discontinue the product and want to shut shop, is a whole other story. It's understandable, but if they're trying to push you into a new product without your choice, without giving you a choice, right? And making you feel like your only option is to sign on the dotted line and to stay with them. That is never the only option. There's pain involved on both sides. And my advice to that particular organization was, you're going to go through the pain no matter what. Meaning, it's never a migration to the cloud. It's always a new implementation, right? Because you're taking an on-premise product and you're moving it into a new generation of product. What does that tell you? It's a new product. You're not going to just migrate. It's not a copy and paste. So the pain will exist. The implementation effort is going to be the same, whichever route you go. So should you be looking at other options? And by the way, Robert is here. He's dressed up as, someone says, Joe Biden.
Look at this group I stumbled into.
I think he's dressed up as an out-of-work DJ.
Yes.
I'm dressed up as someone who just came off a client call and is about to go on a client call when this is done, and I can't change that quickly. So
Mic drop.
Well, Carrie changed a consultant, and he's gonna change out of it. So
Yeah.
you can do it. You can do it.
Okay, so
I
Robert,
was gonna add.
Oh, go ahead, Dave.
To what David was gonna say was that one of the levers that we didn't have with the client I mentioned was that, unfortunately, as this is the end of go live and post go live, pretty much 95% of everything was paid to the vendor. So one of the things in contract negotiations is give yourself some levers. See if you cannot have, before go live, 90% of everything or 95% paid, because it doesn't give you that's show me the money, right? So whoever controls the money and the payment has a little bit more say in what's going on. So we didn't have that lever. So make sure that if you're going out and dealing with a vendor, make sure there's some dry powder, I'll use for lack of a better term, to hold in case things aren't going the way you need right before go live, right? Leave that contingency for you.
yes, and we do have a lot of content on our YouTube channel. I think it's being shared in the comment box in regards to contract negotiation and how you can have leverage within your contract. So make sure you check those out. Robert, real quick, introduce yourself. I know our followers have seen you before, but introduce yourself. Tell us who you're dressed as, and tell us your favorite scary movie.
So Robert Kurnovich, Vice President here at Avero. I'm in charge of the project delivery team, and I'm dressed as AV. I know we look a lot alike, so I figured it'd be really easy to pull this off. I don't know who AV's dressed as. I think I met someone like that 22 or 23 years ago in Las Vegas. But I got to tell you what, David B is taking the cake there. He has the simplicity and the full, complete change and the shock value. I thought I knew David, but I'm learning something new on this call.
Yes.
Always keep them guessing, Robert. Always keep them guessing.
What they all look like.
Yes. Robert, do you want to share a scary story? And then I'm going to go to the comments and take some questions if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, mine. The weirdest one for sure was implementing CAD RMS for police department, and I had the support of everyone but the chief of police. Which public safety is incredibly chain of command oriented. Going through the implementation process and the change management process and post go live with the chief that was fighting me and the technology vendor every single second was a real wild ride. I had a city council and a city manager saying, just ignore the chief, bypass him, don't listen to him. Yeah, that's one of the positions where you need a little bit of buy-in or someone who's at least willing to be a little less resistant despite making their points. So that was incredibly challenging. The other more practical one that we run into every so often is you get in there, and especially with a failed implementation, we're brought in and they paid all the money to the software vendors and the implementer up front. And that one is that's tough. There's ways to get through that, but you lose a lot of your leveraging right there from the get-go when you paid up front. Some clients do for some reason. So as you've probably heard me say like 5 or 6 million times on these, don't pay everything up front to the software vendor and the implementer.
Why do you think they do that? Is it just not knowing what you don't know?
Yeah, I think they just don't know any better. I mean, that's what we run into. It's one of the reasons why clients hire us in the first place, because they don't know what they don't know, and they want us to help quantify and qualify that, and then leverage our experience to help them.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, the dynamic within an organization is very siloed, right? So maybe you have an IT director who is saying, just buy the software. Just buy the software. It'll fix all of our problems, right? And so they get that push, and they're kind of backed into a corner. They're meaning the CFO or the city manager or whoever. I've seen that too recently, which is kind of crazy.
So Megan,
Go
I've
ahead.
also seen people who they don't know, but some of them do it for ease of simplicity. Hey, I can write one check versus going to procurement and having to write 4 or 5 and track it, right? Which is, I know it does seem easier, but you're really shooting yourself in the foot, not giving yourself some leverage there. So that's the reason I've seen some people want to just, hey, let's write the check and be done with it. Or in some clients we've seen, they've got a great fund that they can use that year that's unlimited, but maintaining the SaaS and asking for the year over year maintenance costs is actually more difficult. So we used to some different interesting budgetary constraints that force clients to do that, but that's why we're here, to help them, advise them, and tell them that's not the right thing to do. It's going to cause you pain in the future.
Yeah, and I'm going to pop up another QR code there that has a lot of information on specifically how to avoid being in that situation, right? It's got information how you keep your balance of payments intact, and it's also on our YouTube channel. Some great info there, so go check it out.
Yes, thank you, AV. I'm going to take some questions from the chat. It's been blowing up here. So the first one is Kyler says, AV, what is a realistic timeline for cloud migration?
It depends. Sorry, but
5 days.
In not knowing that particular client's exact situation is hard to know. But it's been anywhere from 12 months to 18 months for most of our clients, right? Because again, the vendor will, not all of them, but most of the time that we've been involved in a situation where the vendor says, we're just moving systems from on-prem to the cloud. A good example is when Kronos became UKG, when that transition happened a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, most clients were told that this is a sticker change. In 3 months, you're going to have the UKG product, which looks like your old product, acts like the old product. And when you go down the implementation path, of course, they've changed a lot of things recently. But back then, 3 years ago, the clients were told that this is just a lift and shift, another bad term without context, and that it's the same product with a different logo. No, it's not. It was a whole new implementation. When the implementation team shows up to our client, they're asking questions about the basics of the business processes and how data is structured. How do you want to do this in the future? Caught the client completely off guard because this is a brand new implementation. You were told that this is going to be a migration to a new platform and it's easy. 3 years later, they're still in implementation, by the way. So that's a scary story, right? Now think about what has to happen for that HR director or finance director to pivot from business as usual to all of a sudden you unexpectedly are in implementation mode, which means you have to dedicate staff, you have to dedicate resources, you have to bring 3,000 employees together in new training sessions. You have to have documentation, you have to hire new consultants to herd the cats. All of that had to happen for this to be somewhat of a success. So I don't know what your question was, but I think that scary story just took me, scared my pants off at the time, and it still does, because a lot of clients are in that position where you're told that, yeah, it's cloud migration, it's going to take 3 months, but it's situation by situation. There is no one cloud migration or one flavor of.
Yeah, there's even one of the school systems we're working with. We had to step them through 5 to 7 different versions to be able to get them on the version that they could migrate to the cloud. And you don't, in these situations, you don't just step through. You just don't run 5 version upgrades in one weekend and then migrate and go, here, you're good to go. You have to stop at every one of those version upgrades and go back and do some testing and make sure there's no problem before you move on to the next one. So these migrations are not as simple as the software vendors or the implementers would like you to believe they are. They're very nuanced. There's a lot of questions that don't get asked up front. And so things pop up later. And, oh, by the way, you've got to do this. By the way, we need 3 weeks to do this. And we're only a week before go live.
Yeah. And it's interesting. The last few months, I've seen tons of RFPs that have their own timelines in them. And they'll say, hey, we want to select a vendor and be implemented in the next 6 months. And so before that response goes out the door, I'm like, absolutely not. Depending on the situation, I'm like, here's what we need to respond. We need to identify the risks and let them know that go live is whatever it means to them. They need to define it and not let the software vendor define it. And so it's been very interesting to me, because typically we are responding and putting our own timelines in there, right? But recently we've seen a ton of RFPs that say, hey, we want to go live in the next 6 months. And so that's been interesting to me, and sort of a shift here this year. Go ahead.
You made a good point, Megan. It can be done,
right?
Most software now is software as a service. It's cloud. It works out of the box. And a lot of these vendors are pushing that narrative, right? Our product works on day one. Small print, the fine print is that basic functionality. It works vanilla. You can make it work for basic functions. And then you can continue to tweak it and configure it to your liking throughout the lives of the contract that you have with the vendor. Fine in theory, right? But even the smallest government organization is nuanced. They've got local rules, they've got ordinances, they have regulations that doesn't quite work with the vanilla system. So what happens then is you buy a system that works on day one or in 6 months, and you're still stuck using Excel sheets and paper, right, to supplement this. And slowly this ball of yarn becomes more complicated. It's how these clients are in this predicament in the first place, because of workarounds and extensive paper and more workarounds. So yes, it can be done. So that RFP you're reading is probably influenced by someone that met a vendor that liked the salesperson at a conference that said 6 months. Don't let a consultant tell you it's more than 6 months. So big grain of salt. And to your point, define what done means. What is done? What is go live? And if in 6 months you can't cut checks, if you can't run payroll, but the system's live per the vendor's definition, think real hard about what you're signing up for.
Absolutely. Dave, we have a question for you, Dave D. So it says, Dave Dar, that's really interesting. So if a client is planning budgets for 2025 and you want to bring in Avero, how do you ensure you have the funds to invest in the partners to help you plan the project budget?
Well, to answer that, I think if someone is looking to do implementation, usually most clients are doing it, the first time in 20 years or adding things. I think you should keep a margin to have an advisor. And it really becomes the question is that, do you want to take the chance of doing it yourself and doing it in-house and then being on the front page of a newspaper for it not working right? Or do you keep a margin in to have us be us or any implementation firm be a advocate for you and help you through all the things that we're talking about today that you may not know, whether it's payment, levers, contracts, implementation. Done. What's done? Like AV said, right? Done is it's implemented and it's vendor leaves, but you can't write checks, you can't make permits, you can't do any of the functionality that you were promised to do, right? So, the answer really is, come have a meeting with us and we'll help you understand what the cost might be. So if you're thinking about doing an ERP implementation next year, it's a conversation. Like come, reach out to Megan, reach out to us, and then you'll have an idea. Yeah, monetarily, there's a percentage of budget you'll want to keep, but we can help you understand that. And it also depends on what type of involvement and depending on your budget, how involved you want us to be. So the answer is it depends, but it all starts with one step. Like Leslie says, the journey of 1,000 steps starts with one. And that's give us a step, give us a call, write us, message us, and we will help you walk through that.
Thank you, Dave, for that plug. No, he's right. Do your research. And we offer, I hate to say this, free advice all the time. We go live every week, but we do. We're happy to answer your questions. We really do want to be that trusted advisor for your next technology project. All right. Whose turn is it? Carrie, we haven't heard from you. Scary story. Let's go. What you got?
Oh, goodness. I think every good scary story needs a good scary title. And mine is titled Death by 1,000 Paper Cuts.
I love it.
And I'll share this one. I've got a client who, when we first met with them, we're doing a big HRIS implementation, and we sat down with HR to have them walk us through their hiring process. Mm-hmm. And they said, okay, well, the first thing that happens is our new employees come in and fill out paper applications. And we're like, okay, we've heard of that before, but it's 2024 and that still seems a little outdated. And then they continued to walk us through the onboarding process, and the amount of paper involved was horrifying. They were literally bleeding money. And we got to the elections process where they were making their benefit elections, and they said, and then they turned over the documents to our payroll coordinators. And I said, wait a second, they're making their benefits elections on paper as well? And I made a joke and I said, let me guess, they're also handing you all a check that has void written on it so you can then do auto drafting. And yes, their employees were still bringing them paper checks with void written on them so that they could then set them up for having their paychecks automatically deposited.
And then where were these files being stored?
Oh, Megan, you're right on board. So we continue the conversation, and we learned that after they make their benefits elections, that is then being scanned into a system that is sent over to their coordination benefits team. And then that team is manually entering that information into an Excel spreadsheet. But then after they've scanned it, they're printing out the paper documents that were already scanned to go to another department to make sure that their insurance company has all the right paper forms. But then, Megan, like I said earlier, you were spot on. They have 3 offsite warehouses that they rent to store all of their paper documents going back 30 years. And like I said, the story is called Death by 1,000 Paper Cuts because they are going back to these storage facilities and pulling employment records, pulling things for pension, pulling things. If there's an argument for benefits coverage, they made the wrong election, saying, oh, well, I thought I signed up for this plan, but you all put in this plan. They're bleeding money left and right for not only the inefficiencies built into the processes, but all the actual storage fees associated with it. And on top of that, the number that can't be calculated, the risk they are putting themselves at should these documents be destroyed or accidentally disclosed, or someone breaks into these facilities and steals the paper record. So it's very scary, in my opinion, having a strong background in all things IT and also a little bit of legal background. The amount of risk they're exposing themselves to is horrifying. And
so if that process was more automated, meaning there was a system that could do that process, how much more protected is the client from, leaking information, right? Because that paper trail, how many people is that form or application touching before it gets stored in this warehouse that nobody knows where it is? And who knows how safe it is. So
we did our business process mapping with them, and we realized that the actual paper copies go to 4 different departments across 9 people before it even gets into a box to then be transferred to a storage facility.
And so how much more protected is the client if they were to put that process in the cloud or implement a new HRIS system?
I thought you might ask this, and it's hard to quantify, but they will basically be moving from stacks of paper on people's desks to having all of this in a cloud-hosted, encrypted environment that has dual-factor authentication. Everything will be stored remotely in the cloud with a disaster recovery plan provided by your vendor. So that if something happens to one database, you know it's safe over here. The amount of safety built into the system, I don't want to say it's immeasurable, but it almost is. Just in storage fees alone, they'll be saving $60,000 a year from having to rent these warehouses. I can tell you that. Then if you calculate, if we get some risk analysts in here and they do some fancy calculations, they can probably tell you that they're saving themselves $3 million in risk alone annually. And I don't even know what their cyber insurance would be lowered to, but it would be significant.
That's insane. That's probably the scariest story we've heard today.
Gary, I heard that client was brought to you by Dunder Mifflin and the Michael Paper Scott Company.
They are keeping the paper business alive.
Yeah,
for now, we're exercising that ghost.
Yes.
Well, I want to take a question from the chat box. What about total cost of ownership? How do you ensure you understand the SaaS pricing model? We did a great video on this. Again, whoever's putting links in there, please add that on the TCO. We did a live on this. Look, I think most people would look for an ROI analysis, like return on investment. What is this investment of $12 million going to bring us as an organization? It's easier done in a private organization where you have a profit motive, right? ERP systems have a direct impact on how well you run your organization, how quickly you turn inventory over. And so it has a direct impact. And in a public sector setting, it's hard to estimate what an ERP system will return on the investment. So looking at it from a purely financial perspective is not the right perspective. You have to look at it from a holistic, sometimes even a social return on investment, right? What is this going to do for us as an organization? Now, we've been asked to do ROI analysis on several implementations where the CFO is trying to make the case for an ERP investment. And in that case, we have to make a lot of assumptions, right? You do business process analysis, you do the 2Bs, you do gap analysis, you make assumptions on what a certain process improvement is going to save the county or the city, and then you bake that into the ROI. So total cost of ownership is not just how much you're going to pay the vendor in year one or the consultants. What is it going to cost you over the life cycle of the contract? And with software as a service model, which means you have contracts that go from 3 years to 7 years, right? You're going to pay the vendor X amount in year one and throughout the life cycle of the contract. We have contracts that go to 10 years. But what else is involved? You may have some hardware investments. You may have some consultant investments. You may have to hire more people. You may have to hire temporary staff. You may have to buy ancillary systems that support this new product. So TCO is a great question. It is a very nuanced sort of calculation that we do our best to provide our clients with. To that earlier question, how do you come up with the cost of a product? How do you plan for it? Total cost of ownership is a really, really good thing to pursue, to calculate, because otherwise you're going to only look at 80% of the cost and not have 20% in your sites, so that and then you'll get surprised with surprise costs.
Yeah, that was a great question. Thank you for that question. And I did post the link to the YouTube video on total cost of ownership. So make sure you go out and check that out. AV, you're last, bud. What you got for us? The scariest story of all time?
Oh gosh, of all time.
Yeah.
Of all time. Look, I think I'll tell a recent one, and I think Robert will fill in the backup vocals on this. Um, we we just got done negotiating a contract, and with a large vendor for a large agency, and the scary part of that was the inflexibility that was shown by. I mean, you would expect a client that wants a certain thing and is willing to pay multi-million dollars. We're talking in the tens of millions. Total cost of ownership is about $25 million for this deal. And the vendor, not necessarily the software vendor, there was a third party involved that is the system integrator. The inflexibility shown by the integrator was just scary to me. And it was on things like contractual terms and conditions. And I wasn't super intimately involved in this. Robert got into the weeds of this thing, but it got scary for a moment because both parties, after 3 months of negotiating, could not agree on, I want to say, two T's and C's that were very, the chances of that thing happening in over the 10-year period are super low, but could happen. So both sets of lawyers were digging their heels on a couple of things that almost derailed the whole thing. And that was scary because we've invested time and money into this negotiation. The client has invested their political capital. They've said no to 7 other vendors that might have been a better fit. Now, the client starts thinking about all these things as you're negotiating the contract. We haven't even got into implementation. And the client's thinking, man, this is really, really hard. I wonder why we're doing this. Should we just kick the can down the road and live with what we have? So all of these questions become the foundation and the baseline of your 3-year implementation and your 10-plus-year relationship with these vendors. And that's a scary, scary, period for a client to be in because you just are worried about the unknowns. And Robert, you've been in that boardroom several times over the last 3 months. Tell us a little bit more about how scared the client was and how scary the situation was.
Yeah, the big thing was trying to get the implementer to understand that it's not these specific items per se. It's the fact that you're signaling to the client that when push comes to shove, you're going to protect your interests. And so the client was ready to wait the entire thing out, walk away, and go with someone else. They were not going to be bullied around. So a lot of it was just educating the vendor of, I know you think there's like 10 or 15 meetings involved in just going back and forth on this. This client is not going to tolerate that. You're going to get 3, maybe 4. And when they would want to nitpick, or the implementer's lawyer would like to nitpick on something, getting them to understand, when you guys point these things out and you push back on them, it tells the client, oh, you guys don't have any quote unquote skin in the game on this. You guys just want the money from us. What part of that do you not understand? When you take this route and you don't show compassion or the ability to share some of the risks, like we talked about in other things, the client goes, well, when you guys aren't going to be a reliable partner for me. And especially when things get tough, you guys are just going to want to collect your money, point to a piece of language in there and go, we never guaranteed or said that we would help you with this. So it really was watching for a while. They're watching the entire deal potentially evaporate and have to start all over again with the second vendor. So the vendors don't do themselves a favor in a lot of this because they think this is going to be like a 6 or 7 or 8 month negotiation. You're going to run into clients that they're like, no, I don't have the tolerance to do that. This needs to be wrapped up in 90 days or less. And if you do not cooperate or show good faith, we will move on. We have no problem doing that. We are not scared or concerned about that.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know if it was the scariest ever, but it's recent, right? You hear about vendors not doing their part or the clients not doing their part when it comes to the actual implementation. But things can go off the rail even before you begin. And that's really terrifying because now you need to worry about, like Robert said, what happens when we kick this thing off? And is your partner a good partner? And, being a good partner is not something you can put in a contract. It's something good professionals do.
Right. Right. No, I think that's a great story and one that we haven't told before. So thank you for sharing that. Does anyone, before we wrap up, does anyone have any additional scary stories or any advice for our clients to not be scared in the future? How do we avoid the scariness as we, take on ERP modernization or IT strategic planning? Any advice or any additional stories that you guys have for our audience today?
I mean, I'm sorry, Robert.
Yeah, ask questions.
Yeah, ask questions. Seek out partners that are unbiased like us. Doesn't have to be us, but we would love to hear from you. It doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be. It's a marathon, right? You're not doing a sprint. When you're replacing a 30-plus-year-old system, you have to take it slow. Treat this like you're building a school, like a sheriff's office, like a justice center. The money you're going to spend, the risk profile is the exact same. It's just not visible. So a lot of times clients don't take it that seriously. It's just an IT project. It's just software replacement. It touches every bit of your organization and your political legacy. So treat it as with as much risk as you would building a physical asset.
Yeah, no, that's good advice. And I agree with Robert. Ask questions when things start to feel scary, when you start to feel it in your gut, like, hey, this is really weird. This doesn't feel right. This is very risky. Ask questions. Call us. I'm available. All of these guys are available at all times. We're all active on social media. On our website, there's a chat feature. So please reach out. Dave, Carrie, any additional thoughts?
I would just like to say, I know the last story was categorized as more recent, but I like to say when I met Robert, he had no grace, and after that last situation, he's got more gray. So I think it was pretty scary.
Yeah.
So have I. I just shaved. That's all. Don't
Yeah.
You need a new razor, buddy.
No, I just have the conversations. I think what everyone's saying, and one of the themes is that ask questions, seek help. Whether it's us or somebody else, reach out to an advisor, someone that has more experience. And like I know, Megan, you mentioned we have free content, and a lot of people do. Soak up the information, reach out to us, reach out to anyone, and just ask questions and have an aid in this. That's how I would say. So there's a lot of pitfalls and things that happen. So I don't think it's anything wrong to ask for advice in anything in life, let alone ERP consultations.
That's right. Carrie, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, ask questions like Dave said. Just don't fall into that blind trust. Don't be like, well, this company's massive, so they must do this right all the time. Don't always just fall into that trap. You always want to make sure that you're protecting yourself, even if that implementer has been fantastic all along the way. You still want to make sure that you're protected throughout everything. So ask those questions. Don't fall in that blind trust. Don't sit there and think just because they're a large mega corporation that they get this right all the time. It is very unique to your situation. So make sure that you're always protecting yourself.
Yep, that's great.
And I was going to echo what David just said. Just because they're a big household name doesn't mean they're perfect at everything they do. And don't be afraid to push back and fight for what your organization needs. Every city is different. And, there's not a one size fits all for every single city out there. So make sure you're getting exactly what fits your city best. And don't be afraid to push back and fight for what you all need.
Yes. And if you don't know how to push back, we do that all the time too. We come in at every phase of the project and lend a helping hand. And we are that trusted advisor that will push back for your best interests. So thank you guys for joining me today. This was very fun. I love this. I love this panel style. You guys had great stories to share. I think we have some great content here. Guys, make sure that you download our 2025 report. A lot of the things we shared today are in written form in that report. So we'd love to know what you think and anything that we can add. So please give us feedback on that. And then AV shared the ERP modernization guide. The executive quick start guide, excuse me. So please make sure you download that if you are getting ready to embark on an ERP implementation. Thanks for joining us today. We will be live again next Wednesday at 10 a.m. We'd love to see you there. And